Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of the Generous Business Owner Podcast. We're going to do a new little format here today where we're basically going to do a little webinar workshop on a kind of trust structure that one of our previous guests on the podcast, Pete Ochs, has worked on very hard. And he and I have had some conversations about it. And I thought, boy, this community would really be blessed to hear about that. And we also have Tim Spuler with us. Tim, welcome. He's a financial consultant for one of our podcast guests as well, and kind of listening in and may ask a few questions along the way. But Pete, welcome to the program.
Yeah, Jeff, great to be here. Great to be back.
And Tim, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Pete, let's just get into it. Explain, I think people, have maybe heard a little tangentially about the Patagonia deal. I think that's, with a purpose trust where the beneficiary was not a human or an animal. Can you just talk about at a high level, what is a purpose trust? How long has it been around? What are the kind of high level benefits of this thing?
Exactly. So, trusts in the United States have been around for a long time, really since the early 1800s. Really, they probably took effect in the mid 1800s, and they became used pretty extensively in the late 1800s when you had all of this wealth created by these entrepreneurial barons, as it were. And so they started figuring out ways to be able to take these assets, put them in trusts, and do whatever they were doing, protect them from their kids, skip generational taxes, whatever. And so trusts in the United States, up until just a few years ago, have really had a beneficiary. So every trust has to have a beneficiary, somebody that's going to benefit from this money or whatever the asset that you put into the trust. And up until a few years ago, there were really only three beneficiaries allowed for trusts in the United States. One was a person, one was a pet, the other was a cemetery plot. Okay. And so because most trusts are, built for people, that worked pretty well. There's been a new trust imported from Europe over the last few years called the Purpose Trust. And so now what you can have there's a fourth beneficiary that can be used in a trust document, and that is a purpose. And really, it's very simple. If I want to set up a trust to put my business in, let's say, I can literally come up with a purpose that says, I want to honor God by creating economic, social, spiritual capital. That's my purpose. Once I have that purpose, I can build a trust around that purpose, and I can literally take my business assets, you could literally have that same purpose and put your house in it, I suppose, if you wanted. So as long as you have a purpose, you can begin to put assets into the trust. Now, these assets that are there need to promote the purpose, all right? It's not just a scheme to put them off to the side. So the reason for the purpose is the assets that are in there have to promote the purpose. So, Jeff, it's okay with you. I put a few slides together.
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll make this thing a little easier and more comprehensible. So if you
while you're putting that up, I'll just say, just to contrast, like all these articles that I've read about Patagonia, they were saying, hey, we're going to benefit the environment. Okay. So I think, at least for me, that's the only one I'd ever seen or read about. And yes. So it makes you think, well, maybe it's just for that kind of thing. It's just for the environment. You know what I mean? So what I think is unique is you're saying, okay, no, it's for whatever kind of purpose you want. And repeat your three again, because I know that's important to you and that's how you're doing it. What is your stated purpose for your trust?
Yes. So the stated purpose for our trust is to honor God by creating economic, social, and spiritual capital in flourishing businesses.
Got it.
So I might just talk about Patagonia for a minute because they were one of the leaders in this thing. I think about 2 years ago, the announcement came out that the Chenards were going to give their company away.
Yes.
All right. And essentially what they did was they had figured out this uh, perpetual purpose trust. All right. One is that the trust is perpetual. Once you put it in it, it's irrevocable. It's going to be there for a long time. The second thing is purpose driven. So you have to have a purpose for the trust to exist. And so Patagonia, because they're very passionate about the environment. They took this $3 billion company called Patagonia, and they literally set up a trust, and they put the voting shares of their company in this trust. And they literally then took the balance of the economic benefit, the non-voting shares of Patagonia, and gave them to a 501(c)(4). The trust owns the voting shares, so in sense, the trust controls the company. And I'll talk about what happens in this trust is what makes it unusual is you start separating the economic beneficial owners from the control owners, and I'll show you that in a graph here in just a minute. But Patagonia did that a couple of years ago. I believe the actual first company that went into an enterprise. We call it an enterprise stewardship trust. It's a perpetual purpose trust in very just kind of technical terms. I think the first company that went into that was Farmers Organic Market. It was a food distribution company, and this probably happened 4 or 5 years ago, if I've got my dates right. So this is a relatively new thing. I don't know. There's probably several hundreds of these in the United States at the current time, but it's relatively new. So if I could plug down through this, let me compare a traditional trust to a perpetual purpose trust. So as I said, the beneficiaries in traditional trusts, and there's a number of them out there, they've basically been a person, a pet, or a cemetery plot up until a few years ago. With the purpose trust, you can have the beneficiary, the person who gets the thing that gets the economic benefit from this, be a purpose. So you can literally say, I want to create a flourishing company that creates economic, social, and spiritual capital. Put that build a trust around that, and the profits from that trust can further that purpose, as it were. The term of the traditional trusts have typically been the life of a beneficiary. So you set up a trust for your dog. Well, that trust is good until the dog dies, and then something has to happen with the assets. It's given to charity or something else. There are things called dynasty trusts. It used to be that these traditional trusts all had a set time period. None of them were perpetual. There was literally a law that's almost in every state. It's called a rule against perpetuities. And they do not want your trust to be in perpetuity because what happens then is you begin to skip these generational income taxes and estate taxes. And so, but it's interesting, the last few years, many states are getting rid of this rule called the rule against perpetuity. So you now can have even dynasty trusts go greater than 20 years. They can be in perpetuity. The purpose trust in particular is built for being perpetual. It's stuff you put in there is going to be in there a long time. There are ways that you can get it out, but it's very difficult. We can talk about the details of that a little later. The second thing is, what about the revocability of trusts? On traditional trusts, we have both revocable and non-revocable trusts. But in a perpetual purpose trust, it's not revocable. So whatever you put in there is going to be in there for a long time. And then I think, as I explained to you, the history of these trusts, traditional trusts have been around in the United States since the mid-1800s. There's lots of them. They work well. The perpetual purpose trust is relatively new to the U.S. I'm going to say it's 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 years old, but they've been around in Europe for a long, long time. There are major companies over there, Bosch and Zeiss, the optics company, and a number of large family companies. Even parts of BMW are owned by Purpose Trust. So they've been around a long time, but they are new to the U.S. I'm going to go on here and talk about why create a Purpose Trust. There are 7 things that I've listed here, and one of them is to create a lasting legacy. You might have the family farm that now is in the 3rd generation, and you've got 60 or 70 people, and they all want to use it, but who owns it and who does this and that? You could literally take something that is near and dear to the family, I'm saying the family farm, and you could put it in a perpetual trust, and you could put some things in there that says, you tell people how they can use it, etc. People have to pay to use it or something, so you can create sustainability, but you can take a legacy asset and put it in a perpetual trust, oftentimes for family purposes. Another reason you'd put it in the trust is for asset protection. You can assets that are in trusts, they just really can't get to them. You can protect it from divorce, you can protect it from bankruptcy issues. There's all kinds of things that you can protect these assets from by putting them in trust. Another thing is privacy and control. Most people aren't going to find out what's going on inside of that trust, so it's very private and a lot of control. Another thing, as we talked about a little earlier, is tax efficiency. It's interesting. The Chenards took a $3 billion company and they set up a 501c4. That is a non-charitable charity, as it were. And so you can give money to it, but you don't get the tax deduction on it because it's a 501c4. There are also 501c3s that many of us are familiar with. They're the typical charities we give to. So when we give, we get a deduction for it. You could take part of your business, if you want, and give it to a 501c3 and get the deduction on it. What Chenards did, because their $3 billion company far exceeded the $26 or $7 million that you can exclude from your estate with the estate exemption. They took the $3 billion and they put it in a 501c4. They got no tax deduction on it. But what they did was they probably saved 50% in estate taxes upon the death of the founder.
Got it.
So there's some great tax efficiencies in trusts. Another thing here is you can limit the trustee discretion. This is particularly relevant, I think, for what we're doing in using these trusts as a business succession tool. Really what you do, and I'm going to go into this a little bit in more detail in a minute, but you can literally designate in the trust, for instance, I'm going to use the example of a business again, how you want the business to be run for a long time. You may say, we don't want it to, we want it to run by biblical principles, or we want to give away X amount of our profits every year. And those things can be built in so that the trustees who are managing the trust have to make sure those things happen every year. Another thing is there's lots of flexibility in charitable giving. I've talked about the 501c4, the 501c3. You can use a DAF. There's lots of different things you can do there. And then lastly, and this is the thing I'm really passionate about and what we're focusing on in our business, is using it as a vehicle for business succession. I just frankly have a concern that there is so much wealth in privately held, in private equity companies right now. And we have this, as you all know, there are 20, 30, 40, 50 trillions of dollars going to be passed from my generation to the next generation. And a lot of that is in privately held companies. And I just frankly see the private equity market coming in and buying up these privately held family companies who are oftentimes the foundation of a community. They bring, they're creating economic, social, and spiritual impact. And I just, from what I've seen, and I have to be honest, I've sold a number of companies to private equity folks or to public companies, and within a few months, they've stripped out what we worked 30, 40 years to build. So I think business succession is really a key thing. Let me stop there and see any questions on why you should create a trust.
Well, the thing that strikes me, and I've had the benefit of going through this a few times with you, but it's such a new concept where, there just haven't been that many. I don't think, I mean, heck, that's what I do for a living is work with business owners on these things. And I haven't seen it done very often. And so I think you're very innovative to really learn these rules, use it, because there's not that many examples for you yet. Okay. And so I just want to kind of normalize somebody who's watching this, who's going, holy smokes, like, now what? And I think one of the real simple thing, I really like this chart, because the way I think about, I actually like your family farm analogy. I know you're in Kansas and you've got one, but
That's right.
I'm also thinking about a great long-term client we've had at Arcos, and man, they literally had the family farm in Kansas, 2 daughters, 2 sons. The sons were working the farm. The daughters weren't. Mom and dad set up, insurance to pay for the value to equalize at their death. But, it happened, they died 30 years later and it wasn't equal. The farm was worth a ton. The insurance wasn't worth much. And now we have a fight in the family, and it tore the place apart. I mean, it was really a sad story. Yeah. And what I like about this is, just as an example, look, nothing human that we create is going to like eliminate all conflict. No, but right. I like this idea of basically the control of the asset, the business or the farm, being essentially a committee. And I know we'll get into that. It's basically a committee, possibly, as opposed to, okay, 16 grandkids own a piece of the farm and we all got to vote on this thing. Good luck. It just gets sold at some point, or there's conflict. One person's got the money, they try to buy the others out. They think they're ripping them off, that kind of deal.
Yes.
It seems like we're sort of switching the control possibly from individuals that can easily fight to possibly a little committee or whatever, where you start to minimize those things. Is that fair, Pete?
Yes, you're exactly right. And
I think the other thing is that multiple generations. So just I'll ask the stupid question, but let's say you got a business worth $100 million, roughly, like you said, 28 million or so is exempt from state taxes right now. But you have this taxable bill that would be like 45% on the 70 that's remaining in there that's taxable. Well, okay, if you give that to your kids, all right, fine, but then it grows again. Now they've got a taxable problem. Giving it to their grandkids, it eliminates that. Is that correct, Pete?
That's correct.
Okay, so to me, I mean, there are some of these things. I know there's a lot of benefits, but I'm just in my brain trying to keep it very simple about now we don't have, because we're working with families who have, the parents give them something. Now they got their own estate problem.
Yes.
That they're trying to solve. And then the grandkids have their own estate problem. So it kind of cleans that up and gives a management system to minimize conflict, I think, and maximize maybe the long-term play out of this. Okay. Is that a decent?
You're exactly right. In fact, I'll go into a few more details on that and show you how that works. Okay. I'll keep plugging here.
Keep going.
So because we're focused on primarily business and not some of these others, I just want to take a minute and tell you why I think creating a 100-year business vis-a-vis using the trust, could be an important thing. If you look at this curve here, essentially what I've done is we go from 0 years down here to 100 years. And essentially what I've done is said, I'm going to take $1, which I'm acting as if it's $1 of earnings out of a business. So every year I'm making $1 and I'm reinvesting it and I'm compounding it vis-a-vis my business at just 5%. Okay. If I did that, you would see that I started with $1 here at 0 years, and at 100 years, it's worth $2,600.
Wow.
This curve is that growth rate. Now, if I were to ask you, At what point on this curve would you want to buy the stock of that business? Okay. Yeah, guess where you're going to be buying that
As
stock?
early as
Right
possible.
here at this
Yeah.
red dot, right?
Right.
Well, that also happens to coincide with where Pete is in life right now.
Right.
I started 40 years ago, I've been in my own business 40 years and I've grown it to here. Okay. And I didn't realize these trusts were available. In fact, they weren't available when I did this, but
Right.
6 years ago, I sold my businesses to my son. Well, guess what I did? I paid some income taxes. And if I don't give all my assets away before now, and when I die, I'm also going to probably pay some estate taxes on those. But you see, what happens is, and this is for really folks of my generation, business owners in my generation. What if we said we weren't going to sell, but we were going to put them in a trust and we were going to keep this economic engine going and run it for the next 100 years? Here's maybe the most important part, Jeff. Not only is this a curve of economic capital compounding, it's a curve of social and spiritual compounding as well.
Yes.
When you're running a terrific business, it's a God honoring, Christ centered business, you're having great impact on the community. Those things will carry on. And I think when we sell to private equity here, and I've done this, they get destroyed within a few months. So I think this curve, when you look at the compounded effect of economic, social, and spiritual impact and capital, as we would call them, I think this is a powerful reason to say, let's try to hold on these companies for a long time. These companies in Europe, it's interesting. I'm just in the last few months, I've been going back trying to study these long-term companies. The oldest company I can find was actually started in China, I think in 700. I think they're in their 54th generation. But these companies, these long-term companies are phenomenal in the impact that they have.
Got it.
Let me go on here and get into a little bit of the details of how this thing works. So bear with me here. This is it's more simple than it looks, okay?
Yeah.
So essentially what we have over here on the left-hand side is what I'd call a traditional structure. You have a business, and that business has some owners, and those owners elect a board. The board hires management, and management runs a business. And we're doing this to maximize shareholder value, maximize the financial value of the business. And both the control and the ownership are combined in this traditional structure. What the ES Trust does is we are bifurcating economic ownership from control. So essentially what we do is the owner over here in the old method, if he wanted to, let's say we have a business owner that wants to use the trust as a succession tool, he would take a few of his shares and give them to the trust, which has all of the voting control, and he could give the other economic shares to another group of people, and they would be non-voting shares. So in some sense, to make this easy, you could say the trust is going to own the Class A voting shares, and everyone else is going to own Class B, C, D, or E non-voting shares, but they can have economic rights here. You could make it so 100% of the value resides in the trust, or you could make it so that 10% resides in the trust, or and the other 90% resides with family, employees, investors, or charity. So you can literally, and I'm going to go through an example here. There's a few questions you have to ask. What's the business worth, and how do I want to allocate, and who wants to wind up with the economic benefit of how this trust works? In the case of Patagonia, what they did was they put one share or in the voting trust. Okay, it became the golden share, and there's one voting share, and the other 100% of the value they put in a charity. It was a 501c4. Now, they could have left some. You could leave room for investors. You could leave some Class C shares, let's say, for employees, share the wealth with them. You can leave some for family. So it's however you want to negotiate this, you can.
Yeah,
what happens is these folks,
the cash flow, right? The economic piece. You can have different constituents that benefit from the cash flow.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
They do not control the business.
Correct. They don't have the voting control of the business. The business is still run. Okay. Yeah. You still have a board for the business. So you could have, right? You just have a normal business board, right?
Yeah. So the way we do that, then all of a sudden, who controls this
Right
thing?
now. Okay.
On the right-hand side. Okay. So over here on control, you have two boards now instead of one board.
Okay. Yeah.
The operating board is the board that we're used to. It would be synonymous with this board over here in the traditional structure.
Exactly.
They're a board who have lots of business acumen. They run the business. They, this could actually, it could be a formal board, or it could just be your operating team, your management team if you
Right.
want. But you're going to have a group of people who run the business. Their job is to maximize economic, social, and spiritual capital. In addition to them, you have a board that sits over them called a purpose board. This board might meet once or twice a year. The sole purpose of the purpose board is to make sure the purpose of the business stays pure. So literally they read, let's say Jeff has a business that he's put in this, and Jeff has codified in the trust the way he wants the business to be run. The purpose board, Jeff can sit on that purpose board while he's alive, but when he passes, there will be other purpose board members appointed or elected, and they will read the trust document every year, and they will say, is the operating board running and operating the company according to the will of Jeff as he is codified in the trust. So that is the purpose of the purpose board. What's really nice about this purpose trust is it's very flexible. What's bad about this trust is it's very flexible. Okay. So for me and our trust that we've put up, and we're putting our business in this, we've literally, we want the purpose board to be self-perpetuating. We want them to approve the annual operating plan, approve the 3 or 4 or 5 year strategic plan, and we want them to approve operating board members. But other than that, they do nothing else and other than make sure the purpose board is working properly. So you have the operating board, and who looks after them is the purpose board. And there is one other level of enforcement or oversight to make sure that the purpose of the trust gets effectuated, and that is an entity called the enforcer. Even trusts in the U.S. now for the last 150 years have typically had what they call a trust protector. They're an outside independent party that makes sure that who's ever administering the trust is doing it according to the trust document. There's a third party called an enforcer, and this enforcer can be really anyone you want, as the purpose board decides who the enforcer is. But that enforcer by law is to look at the trust document, to meet with the purpose board on an annual basis and make sure the purpose board is doing what they're supposed to be doing. If the enforcer believes the purpose board is in violation of the will of the trust, they can go to a court of law and petition the court and say, we don't think the purpose board's doing what they should do. Let me give you an example. Let's say the trust says we're to tithe 10% of our profits every year. And for 2 or 3 years, the operating board does not do that. The enforcer is asking the question because there are this handful of things laid out in the trust that he's enforcing. He can go to a court of law and say they've not tithed their profits for 5 years, and the court can come in and issue an order that says you need to start doing this. And if they don't, they can remove the purpose board members. So there's one other thing in here, and that's called family. Of course, we have a lot of these family businesses. I think, and you began to go down this route, Jeff. What we see is these multi-generational families become pretty convoluted on the cap table pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And things start getting really wonky. And what you have is a lot of these will have 40, 50, 60 shareholders, and let's say you have 60 shareholders and one of them is involved in the business and the other 59 aren't.
Exactly.
The other 59 only want dividends, and
Exactly.
the one person running the business wants to make the business. So you alleviate some of this family issue by saying we're going to put it in a trust, and the purpose we can say, hey, you're going to get dividends equal to 2% of the value of the business for the rest of the life. And you just kind of take away a lot of these family issues that begin to arise.
How do
So
you,
the family,
sorry,
yeah,
finish
no,
your
go
thought,
ahead there.
then I got a question. Go ahead and finish your thought.
The family can be involved. They can be on the purpose board. They could be on the operating board. They could just run the charitable side of the business, as it were. Okay. What the family can't do is, if one of the purposes of our trust is that the business will never be sold.
Right.
We do have ways for that business to be sold with super majority votes of the operating board, the agreement of the enforcer, and a majority vote of the purpose board. But you can't have family if they have an economic interest. In other words, let's say the family has a bunch of non-voting shares over here. They are still subject to the will of the trust. And so they have to operate that business accordingly. But you can have family be on the operating board. You can have them just on the purpose board. Lots of flexibility there.
Okay, so just to again to recap simply in my brain on this slide, it's two boards. That's very interesting, right? Most people think there's one company board running the deal. Now there's two. Okay, there's one for the company, same kind of deal. Whoever's best at running the company, the operating deal. But above them is this purpose board to serve the purpose of the trust. I think that's a big deal, that it has to have a purpose.
Yes.
So what is the purpose? And is everything going to plan? And then you have this enforcer is just making sure the technical, everybody's kind of talking and doing what they say they will. And
Yes.
And okay, so here's my question. Okay, you and I set these up. Well, okay, you've got one. All right. You pass away. You've designated some people that would be on the board or are on the board. How do you pick who that is, and how do successors get selected?
Yes. So inside of your trust document, you define the qualifications for the purpose board and the operating board if you want.
Yeah.
And you also delineate how they will be chosen. In our trust, not only have we said how that process is going to look, we have defined by a list of character traits that a board member should possess for them to be qualified to serve on that purpose board. And then from there, it is self-perpetuating. So, everything can blow up in time. This is the best this is the best structure that I've seen for building a perpetual business. But it's still subject to people, and people are flawed.
So okay, just like any board.
Yes.
Purpose board, and somebody rolls off of it, dies, whatever. Okay.
Yes.
We got to replace it. In your case, how many people are on this? I know it could probably be anything, but
yeah, for us, we're going to have a minimum of 3 on the purpose board, up to 5, and the operating board probably 5, 6, 7. I will tell you, I think part of the genius of this, the way they came up with this, I look at that control side. You have a purpose board, an enforcer, and an operating board. In some sense, I look at that as the way the U.S. government is structured. You have a House of Representatives, you have a Senate, and you have a president. And it kind of takes the 3 of them working together. So you've got this checks and balances.
Well, I would say the enforcer is almost the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? Like there's almost so.
You have these 3 branches of government. Yeah, you're right. The House and the Senate should be one, and
let's
the
just
president
say Congress, president, and then hey,
Supreme Court.
Are we abiding by the Constitution of the trust document? And then the okay, so I'm just trying to lay it out so people have a clear picture of this. Let's say there's 5 board members on this purpose board, just the way any other, like a nonprofit board, a for-profit board, whatever. We have a vacancy. The board then nominates people. They look at the qualifications that need to happen, and they vote to bring them in, right? Just like any board.
That's correct.
Right. So because I think that's what's so unique is, I think we're used to those on really big companies or really big nonprofits that perpetuate themselves, but we don't really think of that in a normal trust structure per se, that kind of perpetual thing. So
that's great. That's a great point. What we're doing is we're bringing some operational and some oversight accountability into the business vis-a-vis the purpose board. Exactly.
So, you introduced me to a friend of yours there in Kansas who just had a very interesting business that, it was a big manufacturing business. It's going great. Okay. There's a bunch of charitable things happening, a bunch of family things. And I just thought that was a great example of the kind of business that would do this. And so I think one of the, I don't know if you've got a slide on this, but one of the questions I wanted to ask is, who is this not for? I think it's pretty clear if you've got a business or a farm or, it takes, to me, the beauty of this is it takes a lot of the conflict out. I know it also maintains the values, if you will, and
Yes.
like that S-curve chart you showed of the compounding of the purpose, which of course
Yes.
is the core of it. But I also think it takes, for me, one of the things, just because I deal with this so much, the conflict is painful for families.
Painful.
I love this idea of minimizing the conflict in it. So who would this not be for, Pete?
I think it would be people who are not living for a greater purpose in life. There's really no reason to have this board or go through all this rigmarole, because what we're really doing is we are so convicted of our purpose. And once again, my purpose is I want to create a business that creates flourishing for the community that it's in. And I don't want that business to be grown in 5, 6, 7 years and then sold out to an outsider who's going to destroy the social and spiritual impact that we've been able to have in our communities. So I think this is a great system for anybody who has a great business and who has a business run with a greater purpose, and also wants it run for a long time and done in a particular way.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of downside to this other than you are giving, if you don't like, you are giving something to a irrevocable trust that's going to be there a long time. And if you can't swallow that, that's probably not a good deal for you.
Yeah.
But
this has been really, really helpful. I think maybe we can leave it there. Pete, if people want to learn more about this, can they contact you? What would be the best way to do that?
Sure. You could go to enterprisestewardship.com and we could help you out there.
Okay. Well, I hope if somebody's interested, they can lean into that, because I know you've spent a lot of time and money putting this together, and I know part of your calling is to help others consider this as a possibility. So thanks for sharing with us today.
You bet. Happy to do that. And thank you for having me, Jeff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining on this kind of new type of podcast on really kind of a webinar, and we'll please share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.